We have no topics of our own.
Are there many episodes like this one?
This is the shape of Gom Jabbar's empire.
What's wrong with it?
Nothing, if that's all you want.
You're saying that this is all they allow.
This, a few mailbags, book clubs. I'm told that even deep dives are just bigger spice morsels.
And I repeat, what's wrong with that?
Yes, Siona, what the fuck?
Yeah, come on, Siona.
Get
Siona
off our backs.
Siona doesn't subscribe.
No,
on Patreon.
not a patron. She's living that free public feed life and doesn't know how good the patrons like Duncan, Idaho have it.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe. From Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name is Leo.
And my name's Abu.
And we are back in the God Emperor of Dune book club.
Yes. As you can hear, we are aging as we make our way through this book.
Old.
It's going to take us 3,500 years.
It's a long book, and there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so much to talk about. Yeah, every episode takes years off my life, truly.
It's true.
And today's episode is no different. But before we get into it, as always, we got to take care of some very quick housekeeping, Leo.
Indeed.
First and foremost, dear listener, as always, no spoilers for today's episode beyond the pages and books that we've covered thus far. So as long as you've read the assigned chapters for today, you're good to go.
Indeed you are. And, of course, a huge shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, as always, Case Aiken and Matthew Good.
Yes.
Gentlemen, need I even tell you that you're invited to see a note?
Oh, of course.
Of course. I can just picture it now. You two leading us. We go, precede us, Matthew Good and Case Aiken. And then you walk in front of us, and then all of the fish speakers, they reach out and they touch you.
Right.
You feel the passion. You feel the passion that they're restraining. And you know that passion is a representation of our gratitude toward you. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Wow, you just painted such a visceral picture for Case and Matthew. I love it.
It's an adaptation of a book that I recently read called God Emperor of Dune.
I hear. Okay, well, that takes care of housekeeping. As always, the game plan is unchanged for today, folks, just like Sea and Oak has been unchanged for decades. We will begin with a summary of today's reading, then we'll dive into a couple of takeaways, and then finally wrap up by chomping down on some delicious spice morsels.
Indeed.
So, before we dive into today's reading, let's take a quick break. But don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back to talk about chapters 22, 23, and 24.
And especially 24. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break. Let's kick off today's assigned reading with chapter 22. It's not 24, but we're going to get to 24, I promise you. Our first chapter today begins with a big ol' pity party.
Oh, boy.
Leto, the Worm Atreides, is the sole attendee to this sad, sad party.
Yeah.
Huinari, who he recently met for the first time, has so deeply affected him. We are seeing Leto Atreides, who literally committed to becoming a giant sandworm for the Golden Path. We see him trying to figure out a way of bailing, trying to figure out a way of jumping ship. He's like, fuck this. I don't want to be a worm. I want to be with her.
Right.
I want to be a human. I want to have sex with her. Those are things I want. And he is like, oh, I could reverse this metamorphosis, but it would take me 3,500 years. And then she'd be dead. Maybe I'll make a Gola of her. No, but that's not her, you know?
Right. The problem is the sunk cost at this point is
Yeah.
literally thousands of years, and it's going to be quite difficult to undo that.
And he doesn't have a skull anymore. What are you going to do, idiot? You going to grow a skull again?
Right, right,
I mean, if anybody could, I believe he could, but still,
right.
it's pretty intense. And broadly, he's considering all of these, what do I do kind of solutions, and none of them are perfect. He's feeling very like none of these are right, none of these are good. And he bemoans that the Ixians have literally, quote, discovered my secret,
Hello.
end quote. So this trap, this ultimate trap that we saw Paul succumb to, Johnny, love, attachment, personal attachment, despite being a Kwisatz Haderach,
Right.
we see Leto basically validating this same weakness that he has.
Right. A weakness that even Siona discovered as well. She opened up that diary. She read that poem he wrote about Ganima. And she realized the worm is capable of love.
And it's a weakness. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And, obviously Ganima, he was twins with Ganima. So you can imagine the connection he had with Ganima is something that if Siona were like, okay, let's get him to fall in love, how do we do another Ganima? How do we give him a new twin? Like, how do we do that? The Ixians have cracked the code, which is, fascinating to think about.
Yeah.
Now, as Leto is battling his temptation, his inner mob is somewhat teasing him. I kind of got the impression they're sort of like pointing and giggling at his like melodrama.
Yeah, they're pretty savage.
It doesn't seem like the kindest internal monologue.
Yeah.
And to be fair, he knew what he was doing. He literally signed this paperwork knowing better than anyone has ever known any deal in the past. He knew what he was getting into, and he got into it nevertheless. And they call him out. His inner mob calls him out for being mopey and melancholic and self-pitying. They're like, wow, you're dramatic, mister. No, this is all my fault.
Right. Oh, no, I'm a worm now.
Oh, no, I'm a worm.
Boo-hoo.
How could have I known? Oh, they're like literally so many ways. You knew, in fact.
Yeah.
And actually, they make a really fun observation. They're like, how interesting that Ix chose to attack Leto in the most meaningful way, quote, with flesh rather than with a machine.
Yeah. Oh,
End
I loved
quote.
that.
So dope.
Yeah.
Incredible.
The grand irony that they found a weakness in the God Emperor's armor and had to utilize flesh and not machines.
Biology from the Ixians. It's unreal.
Yeah. The irony is delicious.
It's great. It's almost as delicious as the spice morsels. Indeed. But hey, folks, hope isn't lost. Leto reflects in previous situations when this kind of feeling arises, a Duncan that he's particularly close with dies or some other thing happens to him. He has a solution. He has a plan. And his solution is kind of like an internal safari.
Yeah.
He describes like going back and reliving someone's life really in depth and kind of losing himself in that experience and using that as kind of a means of avoidance and escape from the torture of whatever that moment is. And he kind of goes through this menu. He's kind of thinking about all the different lives and the intellectuals who he could live in the shoes of for a little bit and who would help, who would benefit. And he kind of imagines this visitor talking through with him why he's considering different people and kind of his thoughts on them. Really another show don't tell moment of our boy is lonely. He's making up people to have conversations with.
Yep.
Rather than talk to the two guards who are there.
Right.
Like
the two guards or the infinite number of people in his other memory.
Yeah.
Instead, he's literally conjuring up an imaginary friend.
Yeah.
So he can have like a back and forth conversation with them.
Oh my God. It's sad. That's pretty sad. But he does recount some of the lives he's lived already. And through this portion, he hilariously takes a jab at Mozart, which I really appreciated.
Yeah.
And then he moves on to considering Jessica briefly. He's like, of every life in his repertoire, in his menu, she had, quote, been one of the best, end quote, which is incredible. I mean, we talk about spending the first Dune book with the top 1% of the top 1% of human capability. But this is Leto saying that Jessica, from his entire lineage, in regards to her analytical mind, her brilliance, is one of the best, had been one of the best ever, which is...
That's a huge compliment.
It's a gold star, for sure. Now, he names some names that we've talked about before on our podcast called Gamjapar. Norma Senva and Aurelius Venport.
Yeah.
Fun shout out to them. Talks about the Fremen, the Zensuni, the Wanderers, and even his father's genetic line going back to the House of Atreus. The origins, the ancient Terran origins of House Atreides.
Right.
And fun little reminder here, our Spacing Guild episode is fucking awesome.
It's one of my favorites.
It's dope. We talked so much about Norma Senva and Aurelius Venport. Their story is just about one of the most incredible that we've talked about in like side characters and things, and really would be a phenomenal HBO miniseries. It's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. If you think you know about the Spacing Guild, we promise you don't, and you should go listen to that episode.
Here are 10 things you won't believe about the Spacing Guild. Presented by Watch Mojo. Yeah, it's pretty good. I do look at that as another example of like Norma Senva was really the incredible mind of that pair.
Right.
And then Aurelius Venport got all this credit because he was the fucking guy. And to see those moments play out in Dune's history is also kind of true to, fiction mirroring life.
Absolutely.
Well, another possibility that Leto considers as he's browsing this menu of lives he could explore is along the lines of like being super turned on, being super horny, because queenery is just like so exactly his type. He's like, yo, maybe I could go to some crazy orgy. Maybe I could like remember some insane, debaucherous, the craziest shit you can picture of human sexuality. He's had those experiences because, again, lest you forget, every one of his memories fucked at some point, guaranteed.
Right. There would not be a future memory if they didn't fuck. Their line would be cut off.
Literally. So while there are many differences, not everyone was shot with arrows. Not everyone was a musical composer. Every single one of them got laid.
Yes.
He has that experience more than any other, almost by definition. But no matter that past experience, no matter how immersive that experience is of going back and reliving one of those debaucherous moments, none of them are as interesting because queenery is real and is alive and is available to him in the present moment.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think we've all been there, like you have good memories in the past, but you fall for someone's like in your life and you're like, oh man, I have good memories, but they're not as good as the person in front of me now, Right. It's beautiful. It's love. It's a hallmark moment. This little thought about Hui. Now, he does consider one last, somewhat bleak option that kind of caught me off guard. A solo pilgrimage into his inner world, possibly never to return.
Oh my God.
Forever in that dream state, kind of lost in that state.
Wow.
Yeah. Quote, Leto felt the inevitability of it, that the dream state would eventually trap him. End quote. So heavy, right? This is a mid-90s pop punk ballad where he's talking about losing everything. And I don't know if this means he would just become always the worm then, like if his conscious mind is gone, if he would just be permanently the worm until someone figured out how to subdue him, or if this would be like maybe catatonic, or I don't know,
akin to a death or like a frozen state.
Yeah, or it's also possible that Hurum, right, his inner kind of life, maybe he would just be full possession at that point.
Right, total abdication to the abomination within him, just choosing to let go of the reins, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that wouldn't actually change that much because Leto already maintaining the balance against abomination via the agreement of all of his inner lives. Right. He kind of created this representative democracy within himself, and he's there as the son of Paul Atreides, but like, how much is he doing versus how much is the crowd contributing? I don't know. Maybe not a lot would change, but the question of whether or not he's there and present to have his moments with Duncan Idaho and have his moments with Moneo and these people.
And I think more importantly, to continue nurturing the golden path, which is his entire purpose.
Yeah.
If he were to fall into himself, into this dream state, never leave his other memories, just choose to fully exist inside his own mind, who is left to nurture the golden path and the future of humanity?
Well, that's
even if it is like a shell version of him, or if not much changes, I feel like it's important for him to be consciously in control.
Yeah, maybe there is some element, like maybe Harum, even if he could do everything.
Right. Harum isn't prescience, so
right.
He doesn't know about the golden path. I don't know. It's a big question mark, and
yeah,
it's interesting to think what would happen if Leto gave up, basically, and just went into this dream state forever and never came out.
That would be an episode of the Marvel What If, like animated, of like what if Leto fell into this dream state.
Right. Gave up Moneo takes over.
Yeah, and everyone's like, "Wait, wow, he is hot! Wow, I didn't know. Why did I not notice this? This is crazy."
Damn, I hope he rules for the next 3,500 years, because I wouldn't mind looking at that.
Moneo's like, "I'm topping out at like 105." I'm sorry, folks, but nevertheless, regardless of what kind of solutions he's considering, this experience of having met Huinari and the state that he's now in is unlike anything in the past. And he highlights that with Huinari, he, quote, had encountered a condition for which no antidote existed, end quote.
Wow.
And with that, he weeps silently alone in the room as the two fish speaker guards are like, wow, he's...
Do we think he's okay? Is he troubled by something?
I actually really love, I'm going to pull it up quickly, the quote between them where one says, "Is God troubled?"
Right.
And the other says, "The sins of the universe would trouble anyone."
Yeah.
Oh, so good. And Leto's like, yeah, okay, fine. That's a
Somebody
fire
give me
lyric.
A hug?
But give me a hug.
Right.
Stop composing Evanescence songs and come hug me.
Right. Even in his weakest moments, he is utterly removed from humanity.
Totally.
And this is one of my favorite chapters in this book, because it's pure unfiltered Leto, right? For the first time in this book, we don't have Leto playing some sort of 4D fucking chess with the people around him, lying to this person, obscuring the truth with this person, playing this person against this person. Right. He's always doing that. He's always dodging assassinations. Here, this is a chapter from end to end where there are no external people. It is just pure, unfiltered, true Leto on the inside his own head. And we get a glimpse of like what's truly going on inside the mind of the God Emperor. And honestly, it is the stuff of nightmares. Like, it's almost sounds like the thoughts of a mad person.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's very intentional. I think letting us inside Leto's mind like this is a way for us to be like, oh my goodness, this worm man is not okay.
Yeah. He needs a BetterHelp subscription.
True.
ASAP.
Alrighty, well, moving on from that chapter, chapter 23. In chapter 23, we join Duncan and Siona in an ornithopter leaving Own, and we're told that they are being taken to a safe place on the God Emperor's orders. Things are getting a bit hairy in Own. He wants Siona and Duncan out of there. No ulterior motive, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. Very casual. He's like, you two, go way over there in that private room.
Right.
One bed.
Right. It's like in high school when your best friend and his crush happen to be in the same room, and you just start like, oh no, I forgot to do laundry. And you just
fucking, I left the laundry on. My laundry's cooking. I need to go turn off my fridge.
Exactly that. So here in the ornithopter, Siona is clearly annoyed. She doesn't want to be here. She doesn't want to be taken somewhere. And Duncan actually feels a bit of a kinship toward her. Quote, she reminded him of himself in those first bitter days when he had vowed vengeance against the Harkonnens. He wondered at her bitterness. End quote.
Yeah, I like that his kind of instinct is toward compassion and understanding her.
Yeah.
Not just dismissing her as like a child. He's going, you have grievances, and I wonder what those are.
Right. And on some level, I also understand them because I too hated the Harkonnens as much as you seemingly hate Leto the Worm.
Right.
And so I get it on some level. He also, as he's observing her in the Ornithopter, compares her to Hui Nori, who he managed to meet exactly one time.
Yeah.
He managed to dodge Moneo's finagling,
Yeah.
get around the fish speakers, and have one interaction with her. And he already has just an absolutely major crush on her.
Yeah.
He doesn't just like her, Leo. He likes Hui
Oh
Nori.
shit! Is he gonna like poke her on Facebook?
You haven't heard it from me.
Is he gonna like?
Oh, poke her on Facebook? Yeah. And if she pokes him back,
Oh my god!
fucking
It's
game
on.
on.
It's on. Yo, when you get the poke back, the reciprocal poke,
yeah,
it's real.
yeah. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to get laid, I promise. Okay. Alrighty, moving on. We're getting a bit too much into my high school years. So as the Ornithopter is passing over a lush green valley, Siona demands that they go to a place called Goigoa nearby. She says, it's a perfectly safe village. Your orders are to take us to a safe place. Take us to Goigoa.
Right.
And Idaho also gives the fish speakers the command, and he is the commander, so they have to do what he says. The fish speaker pilot begrudgingly agrees and swerves the Ornithopter towards Goigoa. And this actually made me giggle like a little schoolgirl because this leads to this very rom-com meet cute moment. Quote, Idaho was thrown against Siona as the craft banked sharply and flew toward a round pocket nestled in the green hills. End quote.
We're just missing the like, and his firm, powerful chest was against her hands, and she couldn't help but notice the years of training. And we get a little bit of that later when he watches her walk away, and it's like her live body swaying like branches.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, you fucking romance boy.
Yeah, I will say this is the most rom-com chapter we've experienced so
totally.
far in this book. Like Dune has taken a bit of a sharp turn.
Yeah.
And we've gone from like speculative sci-fi fantasy to rom-com.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun. We're in our rom-com era between Duncan and Siona.
I also do appreciate, because Siona's clearly up to something, right? And the fish speaker also knows more than Duncan does. And Duncan's like, oh, I'm missing something in this. Like, Siona's up to something, but also the fish speaker seems reluctant. And fuck that. I want to see what you're reluctant to show me. And so, like, that dynamic is really interesting to me, too, because we're seeing Duncan's agency and his curiosity, knowing that there are secrets or things that maybe people don't want to show him, and then being very eager to find that out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Great observation. So once they land in Goigoa, things almost immediately get weird for our guy, Duncan, because a young boy suddenly runs up to him and Siona and yells, quote, "You're not my father," end quote.
Yeah.
And I've never had that happen to me personally.
Doesn't happen to you? Happens to me all the time.
No.
Everywhere I go,
Not
just
yet.
kids run up and they go, "You're not my father," and then they run away, and I go, "Yeah, probably not." Good call, kid.
No,
Kid's smart.
mostly kids are just like weird towards me. Like I was having pizza earlier today at my local pizza place, and this cute little girl who was adorable and like playing came up and just tried to take my slice
What
of
the
pizza
fuck?
like, off my plate. Just off my plate. And I kind of was like, I don't know what to say. I was just like, "Hi, how are you?" So Duncan, in the moment, puts two and two together very quickly, right? He's really on top of things here. He realizes that this boy is a child of his predecessor.
Right.
And he turns to Siona and immediately starts questioning her for the details, right? What's going on? What happened to my predecessor? What the fuck? Siona admits that, yeah, this was kind of all part of her ploy here in coming to Goigoa. Her plan was to basically fuck with this Duncan and see what happens. But now that she's kind of here and it's happening and it's like a reality, and she's watching Duncan grapple with the emotions of trying to figure out, like, is this technically my child? How am I supposed to feel about this? She's actually starting to feel guilty.
Right.
Quote, Siona put both hands over her face and hunched her shoulders. It had not happened at all the way she had imagined it might. She felt betrayed by her own desires for revenge. End quote.
Yeah. I will point out, I am almost disappointed you cut it off that soon, because that quote continues, Idaho was not simply a Gola, something alien and unworthy of consideration. She had felt him thrown against her in the Thopter, had
That's
seen
right.
the obvious emotions on his face and that child, end quote. So
yeah.
I love that idea, because it's right. Like, we're seeing that this is an immature ploy of hers. She had this idea, I'm going to fuck with this guy and it's going to be so satisfying. And then she sees this guy in turmoil, genuinely affected and like suffering, and also confused and in the dark and like loyal because that's all he has. And she's like, oh, fuck. Wow. Oh, shit. No, I regret all
maybe
this.
I took this too far.
Can I undo? Command Z, Command Z.
I shouldn't have brought the guy's kids into this, right? Like, that's, I've crossed a line.
Yeah. No, it's true.
It's a great point. And she's realizing that a Gola is actually a person too, you know? Like, it's not just some like automaton that the Tleilaxu make for the God Emperor. She's kind of realizing that in the moment here.
She also felt him in the Ornithopter. And she's like, oh, that didn't.
Wow, this is
the
broadest chest I've ever felt.
Wow, it's so firm.
Oh my
Good
God.
Lord. But kind of gentle too.
I'd feel safe, but he could also like throw me around if I wanted him to.
But like in a good way.
Now, as it turns out, Duncan's predecessor doesn't only have this one young child, but in fact has a whole ass family here in Goigoa who are still living here. And Duncan sort of starts wandering the streets of Goigoa, and the way it's written, it almost feels like he's naturally or instinctively drawn toward the house where this family lives. And he sees the little child poke his face out of the curtains, and then the curtains open up, and he sees his predecessor's wife, Irti.
Yeah.
And this leads to a shocking revelation. Quote, "It was the face of Jessica resurrected out of a past he had believed gone forever. A genetic prank. Muad'Dib's mother recreated in new flesh." End quote.
Yeah. This is a big moment for him, because he's wondering, what kind of woman would I settle down for?
Right.
I don't settle down. I'm a raging stallion who has sex with anybody. I'm Duncan motherfucking Idaho. And you're telling me I had a family?
Right.
Who's the woman? And he sees her and he's like, oh, it's Jessica.
Yeah.
And this is also, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but we get hints over time of that Duncan was super into Jessica. It's like super kind of maybe in love with her. And then, of course, never did anything because he was loyal to House Atreides and loyal to Leto Atreides.
Right.
And she was his love, which also just gives a very interesting depth to when he thought that she was the traitor and then went out and got
super drunk.
Yeah.
Right. Why would he go out and get drunk over that information?
Yeah. It was in turmoil because this woman that he loved was a traitor as far as he was concerned.
Yeah.
It's so anyway, that's like way in the fucking past. What book are we talking about? Point is,
God, Leo, that was so 10,191 AG. Get with the times, bro. We're 3,500 years later.
I'm old fashioned. I'm old fashioned like that. I'm always thinking in 1091, 10191 years. Yeah. No, but this is just kind of call it out. I think this is maybe the first time we're talking about Duncan had a thing for Jessica.
The first time we've explicitly stated it and explored that idea. Now, the older son, his predecessor's older son, actually comes to the front door, walks out, and he basically tells Duncan and Siona to fuck off. Like, your presence is painful for my mother because you are a copy of her husband, of her late husband. Like, just please leave. Get out of here. And Duncan's like, okay, I understand. We'll get out of here. And what's interesting is the son even turns to Siona and addresses her as if she is a fish speaker.
Right.
He says, quote, "I always thought that you fish speakers were taught to treat your own more kindly." End quote.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a double whammy of revelations, because on one level, this tells us that Irti was once a fish speaker, and that on another level, Siona is really giving off fish speaker vibes.
Right.
If you don't
Yeah.
know who Siona is, your assumption is just, oh, this must be a fish speaker.
Right.
And this is totally in line with her character because, as we know, she was tutored at a fish speaker school. That's where she got her education. So she was, for all intents and purposes, set up to be a fish speaker later in life, and obviously chose a different path, a rebellious path.
I mean, Moneo talks about wanting to make her like the captain of the fish speaker guard is like his ultimate goal for her career.
Right.
I'm imagining she's probably in like fish speaker training acolyte clothes or something. Like I imagine her outfit is also a piece of that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I kind of liked, by the way, like Duncan is such a straightforward person in a lot of ways. And I like that his son appears to be very similar, where his son's like, why the fuck are you here? And he's like, I didn't choose to come here. It wasn't my choice. And the son's like, I got you. That makes sense. You gonna leave? And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna leave. And he's like, cool.
Right.
And it's like, it was like weirdly very amicable. Like the son very quickly seemed to be like, yeah, you're good. I got you. And that's why he turns to Siona and he's like, yo, you're fucked up.
Yo.
What the fuck?
Right.
Anyway, bye. It's like, dang.
Yeah.
I like that. Kind of like he gets it. He
That's
understands.
a great point. What you would expect from Duncan Idaho's son,
Totally.
or at least one of the Duncan Idaho sons.
Yeah.
So Duncan and Siona respect the son's wishes and they walk away. They go sit next to a lake or something. And the topic of discussion then turns toward Leto 2 and the state of the empire.
Right.
And we, the reader, as well as Duncan, get a greater understanding of where some of Siona's bitterness comes from, because she starts explaining her view on Leto's piece, which can be summed up in essentially this quote. Quote, "We have no lives of our own." End quote.
Right.
And she even recalls to Duncan Leto's words that she had overheard back when she was a child still living in the Citadel, when he had called himself an affliction on humanity, which is a very Leto thing to say, right? Even Duncan is not surprised to hear this. He's like, yeah, that sounds exactly like something that fucking Leto would say about himself. But what's interesting is that Duncan is not as stirred by these words as child Siona was all those years ago. What instead happens is that his mind starts to actually wander in this moment to the recent assignment he had to kill the last remaining Carino heir, which we learn he hilariously just pawned off to a fish speaker subordinate. He made someone else do it. And I think this is interesting because you might wonder, like, okay, why is his mind wandering? Why is he not paying attention to what Siona is saying? My read on it is that the word affliction to Siona means the worm, right? She sees the worm as this poison within the ranks of humanity. But when Duncan hears the word affliction, he flashes back to the Carinos. He's still so programmed to think in the old-fashioned ways of the empire of 10,191 AG that he still thinks, oh, bad guys equal Carino equal Harkonnen, and good guys equal Atreides. His loyalty to the Atreides is clearly still unbroken here, and his ways of thinking are still 3,000 years old.
Yeah, I do also see this as very clearly through this chapter, Siona sounds young. She sounds like a very idealistic kid.
Totally.
And there's even a moment where she's like, back when I was a kid, I talked to Leto. And Duncan's like, you're still a kid.
Three
like,
whole years ago.
Yeah. When they're like, back when I was a child a year ago, it's like, all right. There's that side of it. Because Duncan, I think his loyalty to House Atreides comes from not naivety about House Atreides not being the perfect house, right? Like, he saw Leto Atreides hiring propagandists to tell people how great he is, right? Like, he knows the sort of double-edged sword of you become a charismatic leader through sometimes things that are not so palatable. And I think in this situation, he's just gotten used to living within a murky, morally gray universe. Mm-hmm. And Siona is still seeing, she hears Leto go, I'm an affliction. And she goes, boom, bad guy. Fucking nailed it. We're done here, folks. Knew it. Okay, I'm the good guy. He's the bad guy. We're done here. This is great. And Duncan hears, I'm an affliction. And he goes, yeah, afflictions exist in all these different shades and all these different circumstances. And at the end of the day, I loved House Atreides, and I loved and I'm loyal to members of House Atreides. And as he tells her, they're all there. They're all in him. He is all of them.
Right.
And they were my friends, and I knew them, and I trusted them. So it's his unbroken loyalty to House Atreides, but it's also, I think, Siona not yet there.
Right.
Not yet understanding. There's a lot more to this than she's aware of.
Yeah. Still thinking in very black and white terms.
Although also still thinking the way that Leto wants her to be thinking.
Right.
Because I have no doubt that he knew she was listening.
Yeah.
He was like, hey, Moneo, man, I sure am an affliction. I mean, I was like, why are you yelling?
Right. I sure wouldn't want to be a disease, which is a bit of a synonym for affliction in case this child doesn't.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, that's an interesting take as well. Duncan definitely has more experience under his belt in the dirty, murky waters of the Imperium than someone like Siona does. All right, so let's end this chapter. At the end of the chapter, Siona reveals that the worm wants her to breed with Duncan, and that's probably why they're both here. To which Duncan replies, very adamantly, quote, I'm not his stud, end quote. He has no intention of breeding with Siona on command of the God Emperor. And Siona is also like, yeah, don't fucking touch me. So by the end of this chapter, seemingly, everyone is on the same page, right, Leo?
Yeah.
No one has caught even an inkling of feelings, I'm sure.
No, he's just a Gola after all.
He's
right?
just a Gola after all.
Just a Gola.
Just an automaton. I would fuck with him and bring him to his former children.
Yeah, why not?
I'm certain this won't result in a very rom-com enemies to lovers situation, but I suppose we'll just have to wait and see.
I do love, we don't get it until the next chapter, but I love her line that she tells him when they're in the bedroom together.
Right.
And she's like, touch me and I kill you.
And I kill you. Right. And his response, like, yeah, consider yourself alone. I want some privacy anyway. Like, it's, clearly they're very much on the same page in, again, like a very rom-com meet cute moment of like, y'all are more similar than you think. You just don't realize it yet. And both of you have kind of caught feelings.
Yeah. And actually, you know what? Chapter 24, let's talk about it, because here we are. In our final chapter today, we get to see Sihanouk. But before we get that, we're with Duncan as he like awakens and he thinks about his time in Goigoa and his kind of moments with Siona. And it's, again, there's like real palpable tension here. They're sleeping in the same room. They've both been like, yeah, you're gross. Shut up. And then they're like, you know, backs turned to each other.
Right.
But then he talks about waking in the night and listening to her breathe and knowing that she's listening to him breathing.
Yep.
And it's like,
the tension.
Oh, that's not how people act when they don't give a shit about each other.
Right.
And then he also is like kind of abashed and like embarrassed at moments and doesn't exactly know how to like handle her, even though she's very much his junior. And finally she does speak to him. It's the only time they speak. She says, quote, it would not offend me to be your friend. End quote. I know. Considering the last thing she said to him was touch me and you fucking die.
Yeah.
They are on a fast track to being lovers.
Oh,
Pretty
yeah.
sure.
Oh, yeah. He should poke her on Facebook.
He should. He absolutely should. And I loved also Duncan's response to that, where he says, quote, yes, well, certainly, end quote. Which is very accurate to how I take compliments when people go, right. Hey, this is really great about you. And I'm like,
indubitably.
Yeah, I want to tell you why you're wrong, but it feels rude. Anyway, so very, very sweet to see this kind of birth of whatever is happening, whatever is happening there. Now, underneath the festival city of On, Duncan meets with Leto, and they enter the giant underground chamber where Sihanouk is going to take place. By the way, Siona was sent back to the Citadel, so she's not going back to On, not going back to school. Clearly, Leto's promise to remove her to the Citadel so that Moneo can keep an eye on her and keep track
Right.
of her. He's following through with this. So
Right.
she's removed to the Citadel. Duncan has a festival to go to. He has to go to Sihanouk. Now the room, they go through this long corridor and he's like completely lost at a point. The room they arrive in is fucking huge. It's unbelievably big. And I read it in meters and then immediately forgot to look up how big it is. At least 1,100 meters on a side is about 3,600 feet. So it's about
Wow.
3,600 feet square. Like that's the room.
Wow. That
And
sure
it's-
makes the New York apartment lease I just signed feel kind of like a cage.
It's okay. As long as you're paying an arm and a leg for that cage, then all things are right in the world.
Right. Mine's also 3,600 inches on one side.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
not even true. What's that true?
It's smaller than that.
3,600 divided by 12. 300 feet?
Yeah. It's a big room. It's still a pretty big room.
Yeah, enormous. I'm living like a king in New York, folks.
That's Billionaires Row here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really, really huge room. And the women, the fish speakers filling the room are shoulder to shoulder. He even thinks at one point, I don't think someone could fall because they're so packed in. And these are 3 women from each garrison of fish speakers from the different worlds in the Imperium.
Right.
So even though you have this unbelievably massive room, shoulder to shoulder packed with women, these are only 3 representatives from each place. Really gives us a sense of the scope of Leto's force in the universe. And Duncan and Leto make their way to this kind of cleared space for the beginning of the ritual. And Leto kicks it off. Quote, "My brides," Leto said, "I welcome you to Sihanouk." End quote. Good little ceremony kickoff there.
Yeah.
That's
great opening
that's
line. I'm going to try that at my next presentation at work.
My
My
brides.
brides.
The
Welcome
mostly,
to the Q2 results.
the mostly men in the room are like, what?
They're rapt
God.
with attention. They're like, oh, shit.
I've never been called someone's bride before. I kind of like it. You just disarm the toxic masculinity in like a heartbeat. Everyone's like, oh my God, my heavens, this is nice. Well, to put it simply, this whole ceremony, as Sihanouk kicks off, is extremely unnerving for Duncan.
Oh, yeah.
Duncan is just struggling the whole time as he watches Leto lead this amassed kind of fish speaker presence through the ritual.
Right.
And at Leto's command, there are some fish speaker like people who are kind of being promoted out of, or they're retiring out of service. It's
Right.
kind of a rotation of the guard is kind of how it's
Yes.
described. They enter the hall with children, with young children. And Duncan has a moment where he's like, what is this moment for these like 1-year-old boys going to be? Like, it's always going to be there in their subconscious.
Yeah.
Below the surface. They're not going to remember it, but fascinating. And these retirees come in and they line up and they kind of have a silent prayer moment for the future of humanity. Now, during this eerie and powerful silence, Duncan is thinking back on conversations with Leto about the kind of female army and kind of his stubbornness about, oh, well, that can't work. That's bullshit.
Right.
Can't be as powerful or as good as male armies, obviously. And that stubbornness is beginning to crack here, where he's like, I didn't know it was possible to have this much power in a room.
Yep.
Like the force of their loyalty, the force, he even thinks about they would not hesitate to kill their own children if he told them to. Like the power in that room at that moment is something that really cuts through a lot of his doubts, his misogynistic doubts.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk more about the ceremony and the all-female army and everything in our takeaways. So stay tuned for that. But after the assembled crowd eats their ceremonial wafer, which is it's not like the Christian wafers, all right? Duncan's
It's
like
different.
the fucking Christian wafer, and Leto's like, no, it doesn't become my flesh. It's completely different. It's like, okay, I mean, it's still very
feels
similar.
like you like borrowed some
It's, like,
ideas.
very
maybe.
similar. All right, I mean, if you say so, but seems very similar. Leto, this is a huge flex, pulls out a crystal box from his cart, which apparently just has compartments, snacks. I don't know, a Nintendo Switch in one of them. He pulls out a box, a crystalline box, and inside that box is Paul Muad'Dib's crysknife.
Wow.
Which is actually like, I read that and was like, holy shit, he's got Paul's cryst. Like, that's insane to me. And I had to remind myself, I'm reading a book. This is like words on a page, and it's just a book. But I was like, wow, oh my God, I don't want to like speak too loudly because Paul's crysknife is here. That's incredible.
Right.
I bet the replicas of that at the the legendary merch store are going to be so expensive. And he thinks back once again on his words with Leto about the female army, and he realizes really that those words utterly failed at capturing the feeling in the room. Right?
Yeah.
Nothing could have prepared him for this room, which also, in all of those conversations, he's going, I want to be better prepared for what's in that room. And Leto's handing him all these like kind of platitudes, these meaningless sayings. And Duncan's going, all of this is meaningless. Why isn't he just telling me? I kind of get the impression in this moment, he goes, oh, okay. Yeah. There's nothing he could have said that would have remotely prepared me for this experience.
Right. No words could have explained the energy in this room right now. And that really makes me think about our discussion from last episode.
Yeah.
About the nature of truth and the inability of words to fully capture the truth. It's a thing that Leto goes on and on about. He has a TED Talk about it.
Yeah.
And here we see a very clear example of that. Words, any words that Leto would have told Duncan back during their chats in the Citadel before Sihanouk would simply have been inadequate to explain the feeling that Duncan is having now, standing in Sihanouk, experiencing it firsthand.
And even Sihanouk is just a word, but it is all of this. It is this whole experience. It's everything. Yeah. Both of those takeaways from that episode really do come back in full force.
Right.
The power of words, but the meaninglessness of them, that they are arbitrary. And Sihanouk is what Leto wants it to be.
Right.
And he made all of this, and it works. It does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, the chapter ends. The chapter and the ritual concludes as Leto and Duncan step down from their ledge, and the crowd parts, and Leto's like, Duncan, you go first. Duncan's like, oh shit, okay. So he climbs down, and they walk through this throng of fish speaker women.
Right.
And we get this little excerpt. Quote, as Idaho marched stoically ahead, women reached from all sides to touch him, to touch Leto, or merely touch the royal cart. Idaho felt the restrained passion in their touch and knew the deepest fear in his experience. End quote. Really interesting, powerful, mysterious.
Yeah. Their fanaticism is at once so extremely tempting and terrifying.
Yeah.
To Duncan in this moment.
He says, right, that Leto is tempting him. He's like, hey, look at this thing. Do you want a part of it? I'm offering you part of it.
Right.
But it's also kind of a false offer because he's like, Duncan, you you loyal to me? And Duncan's like, Jesus, there's fucking a million powerful women in this room that could all kill me. Yes? Like, what am I supposed to say to that? There's also, I've seen some conversations about the deepest fear in him. And I don't know, there were a couple of theories. I'd be interested to hear. Did you have any thoughts about that idea, the deepest fear that Duncan experiences?
No, to me, it was simply what he has just experienced at Sihanouk and the realities of the amount of power and loyalty and true, undying, blind fanaticism that Leto has cultivated is terrifying to Duncan, both because it is so ultimately tempting to wield power like that, every autocratic ruler, every person in power, frankly, wants to wield that kind of power and loyalty. That's a tempting prospect to Duncan, even to have a role in that. At the same time, he realizes this is such raw and terrifying power in this room. These women would literally dash their own babies against the ground if the god told them to. It's horrifying, you know? It's
Yeah.
a scary amount of power, and it's a scary amount of fanaticism, and it's a scary vision for the empire and humanity that Leto has created.
I do wonder, because Duncan kind of self-identifies as, I am loyal to House Atreides. Like, his loyalty to House Atreides is kind of a core element of his self-identification.
Right.
But his loyalty always came with the caveat of he does what he wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
He maintains personal agency within that loyalty, i.e., I am not a stud for House Atreides.
Right.
I will do X, Y, and Z, but I will not do, Q or whatever. So
Right.
I do see also maybe one of his fears is the existence of binding and loyalty that challenges the thing that ultimately at the end of the day he still claims for himself, which is agency. Is there fanatical loyalty that takes away all of that agency? There is. Oh my God. And here I am facing it. My God, the power. Because also Leto says binding, Duncan, binding. It's really interesting. I'm wondering how much of his fear here is about the quality of his own loyalty and the limits of that, and also how that reflects on weakness. I don't know. It's interesting to me. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of layers to see in Oak. All of that in one word, Leo.
All of that, Lord? Yes, indeed. Well, those were our chapter summaries. Out of the way, taken care of. Whew! We talked about, maybe only doing 2 of them, but there they were, all 3. We are going to talk now about our key takeaways, but first we're going to take a quick break. So stretch your legs, take a deep breath. We'll be right back with our key takeaways right after this.
Welcome back, folks. Let's get into the takeaways from today's reading. We have 2 today, a bite-sized one and then an absolutely fucking enormous one. So let's get the bite-sized one out of the way first.
Sure.
And talk about peace, chaos, and the golden path. So during Sihanouk, one of Duncan's many flashbacks that he has to previous conversations with Leto is about a conversation he had with the God Emperor, specifically about the golden path and Leto's forced tranquility, his forced peace. And there's some interesting ideas here that clue us in further on Leto's long-term plans and the purpose of the golden path, because as readers, we are still a little bit out of the loop and a bit fuzzy on what the fuck the golden path exactly is. So let's chat about it, because we're given a bit of insight. As Leto explains the reasons for his peace, Duncan is confused. Leto here is, on one level, claiming that he has created peace within his empire, but also, in the same breath, says that he is cultivating aggression among his people. Quote, "It is not precisely peace. It is tranquility, a fertile ground for the growth of rigid classes and many other forms of aggression." End quote.
Yep.
And, a lot of this is just going over Duncan's head, because he's like, you're talking nonsense. What are you saying? Peace and aggression, peace and aggression. How can you cultivate both of those things? And Leto tries to explain further. And he says, Duncan, look, I can't change human nature. Humanity always seeks chaos. And so I have to harness that energy. I have to channel it in certain directions to ensure the future of my golden path, and ultimately to ensure the very existence of humanity.
Right.
And interestingly, we got a chapter excerpt in today's reading, not for this chapter, but actually for 23, the Siona and Duncan rom-com chapter, that speaks to this very idea. Here's a bit from the excerpt in Leto's Stolen Journals. Quote, "I know a profound pattern which humans deny with their very words, even while their actions affirm it. They say they seek security and quiet, the condition they call peace. Even as they speak, they create the seeds of turmoil and violence. I give them enduring eons of enforced tranquility, which plods on, despite their every effort to escape into chaos. Believe me, the memory of Leto's peace shall abide with them forever. They will seek their quiet security thereafter, only with extreme caution and steadfast preparation. End quote.
I love that.
One of the all-time great quotes in this book.
Yeah. I think the idea of he is not saying that tranquility and peace have no place in the future of humanity.
Right.
He's saying that they should only be pursued with steadfast preparation and caution, because there's extreme danger in not being challenged and not growing and not changing. Stagnation is that ultimate danger. And stagnation, it's a byproduct of tranquility and peace.
Right.
Things will just kind of continue as they are.
Definitely. It is the ultimate warning against stagnation, the thing we know will be the end of the human race. Even Paul recognized this all the way back in Dune Messiah.
Right.
And what Leto's trying to get across to Duncan basically is that what I'm doing is the ultimate lesson for humanity. My tyrannical rule and the end result of the Golden Path is all in service of teaching humanity once and for all to avoid stagnation. And I do this by literally forcing physical, social, and spiritual stagnation on them for thousands of years. It's like a lesson by example. You're not going to be afraid of the fire until you burn your hand on it. And then you'll know, don't reach into the fire to grab the marshmallow I dropped.
Yeah.
You know, just a random example off the top of my head.
People be doing that.
So I really love what Leto's getting at here. This idea of peace and chaos in human nature and stagnation. And to avoid it, he has to enforce every type of it on humanity to teach them to fight out of it. Because the truth is, Leto wants his people to be rebellious.
Yeah.
He is cultivating that aggression. He wants them to be ultimately free. And he's doing that by taking away as many of their freedoms as possible. And what this makes me think of is his thoughts on Siona. Yeah, consider a few episodes ago, we talked about how much he admires Siona, how he thinks of her as the future, while he himself is just a collection of the infinite dead past. That doesn't matter, right? The only thing that matters is Siona and the future of humanity. And of course, the only way he knows how to create lots of Sionas, right? Not literally Siona the woman, but the mindset of Siona and the type of person she is to oppress humanity like no ruler has ever done before.
Right.
To make sure this lesson sinks into humanity's very bones forever. And ultimately, the goal is Siona-style personalities. Siona is a prime example of the types of people Leto wants humanity to be. Someone who seeks ultimate freedom, right? She expresses this to Duncan in Goigoa.
Yeah. Right.
We have no lives of our own. Look at this village. I can't go anywhere. Our jailers would never let us. I can't just get on a guild ship and go wherever the fuck I want. We have no lives of our own. We have no freedoms of our own.
Yeah, and it's also because he's bringing up the old-fashioned idea, the imperial idea from 3,000 years ago. You mean this peaceful little village where everyone's happy, basically? Right. What's the problem with it? And I don't think that she's articulating herself very well in that section, but she's got the right idea.
Right.
It's like, if this is everywhere, then we're doomed. And that's the lesson. She's like the walking, talking embodiment of the lesson learned. Although, again, she needs to work on her communication skills.
And as we discussed, she's young and needs to sort of learn the larger scope of things and the ultimate danger of stagnation. But even at this young age, she's picking away at that idea. She's recognizing it in a way where many people in the Empire are simply accepting it. This is just the way things are now. So to wrap up this sort of first mini takeaway, I do find myself questioning whether this is the best way to teach humanity a lesson on a grand scale.
Sure.
right? Like, is ultimate oppression the only way, Leto, that you could come up with to teach this lesson?
Yeah.
I'd personally argue that, like, perhaps some lessons taught through love and compassion and understanding could be equally powerful.
Did you try a TED Talk? TED Talks are great.
TED
You could have done a
Talks,
TED Talk.
you know, not a TEDx.
No. Or like a masterclass series.
A masterclass.
Hello, my name is Leto 2, and this is my masterclass.
How to avoid stagnation in 10 easy steps.
Is this video 3,500 years long?
Oh my God.
How do I watch this?
So, I don't know. I, of course, am not a near omniscient, all-knowing, all-seeing God Emperor Worm Boy.
Sure.
So who am I to argue against Leto's methods? But I do wonder if this is the only way Leto has to teach this lesson. Regardless of what I think about it, though, this is the way he has chosen to teach his lesson to humanity and to ultimately save them.
I was going to say, because we didn't get to say it on mic yet, we had a listener in our Discord, Amel, I think, bring up an incredible point about all this, by the way, about the golden path and teaching humanity this lesson. Amel wrote, quote, "By weaning the population off spice and shortening their lives, he made the effects of natural selection occur faster by making generational turnover shorter." End quote.
Wow.
And both of us were like, we lost our minds in the Discord. Like, because again, it's a great point that how do you teach an effective lesson generationally? And like, how do you make sure that people remember? Well, part of that's like, you got to distance them from the kind of lures of the old way of thinking. You have to distance them from the way that Duncan thinks. And one of the ways you can do that is shorten the generational lifespan, right?
Turnover, baby.
Create that turnover. And sure enough, if you're trying to get to someone like Siona, and again, he said, if Siona were to have died from those wolves, he could always make another. He could always make another Siona.
Right.
But it's out of that petri dish that he's running on a galactic scale that having that sort of fast turnover is also part of it.
Yeah. I love that point from Amel. Such a great observation that he is creating that enforced turnovers that he can teach his lesson more effectively and faster and squeeze more people into the years he has, right? Like, it's funny to think that a 3,500-year-old god worm is running out of time, but we were actually told,
I don't have enough time,
back in Children of Dune in the very last chapter, that he's going to be around for 4,000 years. We're at the tail end of his 4,000-year reign.
Right. Yeah.
So he is actually running out of time. He needs to teach humanity this lesson and make sure it sticks before he goes.
Right. And he is on track. I think he would have a sense of urgency in his thoughts if he were like running out of time. But yeah, it's a good point, because, you know, he also talks about really not having control over the worm and that happening more often, and how this metamorphosis is not complete yet. And all of those things speak to he doesn't have as much control as people think he does over everything. So that was our first takeaway, kind of fitting a mini takeaway in there that I just wanted to shout out. But our next thing that we wanted to talk about is female armies, part 2.
Part 2. We've already talked about it some.
Indeed. And this is worth talking about because during Sihanouk, as he takes in the ceremony, as he sort of witnesses everything, Duncan is pretty actively thinking back on conversations with Leto about the female army. Because again, everything he fucking talks about with Leto, he's like, no, but explain ladies. Leto's like, you're really fixated on this, bud. You know, explain the golden path, explain why female armies, and explain how all of this ties to everything, right?
Right.
And we discussed some of these ideas earlier, right? Duncan and Moneo over breakfast having these conversations. But we hear Leto himself elaborate a little bit on his views during these conversations. And once again, this is pretty heady stuff.
Yeah.
Once again, you and I looked at everything and kind of, not as much this time, but like slightly different takeaways, or we kind of focused on slightly different things. And once again, skewing heavily into some problematic thinking and some questionable shit that we decided it would be worth breaking down. To begin, Duncan thinks back on Leto's reason for his all-female army. This is a new thing that Leto says. Quote, "Loyalty in a male army fastens onto the army itself rather than onto the civilization which fosters the army. Loyalty in a female army fastens onto the leader." End quote.
Interesting.
Now, at the time when he first heard that, Duncan was skeptical, but witnessing Sihanouk, his skepticism is dying very quickly.
Yeah.
He's like, oh shit, yeah, they are fastened onto the leader.
Right.
Their fanatic loyalty is legitimately awe-inspiring and legitimately terrifying.
Right.
You know, we mentioned it a couple of times, but it was really a shocking sentence. Quote, if Leto ordered it, Idaho sensed these women would smash their babies to death against the ledge.
Yeah.
End quote. A really horrifying idea, but gives us a very visceral feeling of what does this loyalty feel like in the room. I also think it's interesting because Leto's statement is talking about two things. It talks about the male army fastening onto the army itself rather than the civilization that fosters it. And then it talks about the female army's ability to kind of fasten onto a leader, which is kind of two different elements, right? And I can't help but think back on the quote that Leto shared where he said, the male army, lacking an external enemy, turns upon its populace always.
Mm-hmm.
That can't happen if the loyalty is to the civilization which fosters it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the loyalty is to the people you're protecting, you wouldn't do that. So this is sort of reiterating in new words that same concept, but introducing the idea of, no, but actually the female army as I've built it fastens onto a leader, aka me.
Right.
In a way that you're not even going to be able to comprehend until you're in the room with us, right?
Right. He even reiterates some of those ideas about needing an external enemy to
Right.
Duncan in these conversations as well.
That's true.
Now, before we move on to the next topic of discussion, we did want to pause here for just a quick second and throw out a content warning, because this next section that we're going to talk about is about Leto's thoughts on sexual assault. And we know that topic may be difficult for some folks to hear about, so we will make sure to have timestamps in the show notes if you'd like to skip ahead. So, with that having been said, Duncan, who is still in the flashbacks in these conversations he had back in the Citadel, stubbornly unconvinced that all of these reasons that Leto is rattling off are enough to justify an all-female army. How ridiculous.
Yeah. And he's also looking for specifics. And a lot of Leto's answers kind of are heady.
TED Talky.
They're very TED Talky. Yeah. They're very theoretical.
The army always turns against the civilization, Duncan, you know? And he's just like, no, give me like bullet point examples.
So he does.
And so Leto's like, all right, motherfucker, you want a bullet pointed example? Here it is. Quote, rape is foreign to women, Duncan. You ask for a sex-rooted behavioral difference? There's one.
Yeah.
End quote.
Yeah.
And this is where things get hairy.
Yeah.
And quite problematic, because Leto explains that, quote, rape is a payoff in male military conquest, end quote. And that what his fish speakers do instead is tame the males.
Right.
And he goes on to say, sure, my fish speakers may use a quote unquote form of rape at first, whatever the fuck he means by that, but it is ultimately in service of domesticating and taming the males. So his fish speakers aren't succumbing to the rape that an all male army may succumb to and often has. And obviously history proves that's true.
Yeah. I was going to say again, some of these things are more or less supported by like historical elements where like every time there's a conquering male forces, because that's historically what has been conquering a village or conquering whatever, like rape happens.
Yes.
That's there. But yeah, the wording here really threw me off because the quote, they submit to a form of rape, end quote.
Yeah.
He's saying that the Huri tame men, and that is its own fucking crazy idea. Maybe using sexual assault, using rape, but they're also submitting to it. It's them submitting to a form of rape. So I'm confused. I'm genuinely confused about what this means. Now, I have heard from some of the more radical feminist kind of writers and speakers from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and since then, and again, controversial speakers, controversial writers, controversial individuals, but ones who started some very important conversations that were very good to have had. And in particular, Andrea Dworkin, who was publishing some of her most notable books in the 60s and 70s, like, so literally the time of this book being written, has said that heterosexual intercourse is, quote, the pure, sterile, formal expression of men's contempt for women, end quote. And has been often misattributed to the idea that all sex is rape for women, which again is a very extreme stance.
Yeah, right.
But it's one that has been said as part of some of the most radical of the feministic kind of things. And that makes a certain sense in this context, right? Like if Leto is talking about the sexual intercourse that the Huri submit to, and he's just referring to that as a form of rape.
I see. That
makes sense almost. But also that's such a fucking like left field. I feel like I'm really stretching to make that make sense, but I cannot make it make sense otherwise.
Yeah.
Because they are submitting to it. And then who's committing to it? Are his fish speakers systemically raped by men? Like, I don't understand what's happening using this verbiage.
Right. What's interesting is I didn't even take the word submit the way that you're taking it.
Can you take it another way? Like,
yeah, well, like in the context of what he's talking about, like male military conquest, they will, like, I almost took the word submit there to be like succumb or like lower themselves to a,
like submit to the temptation of rape.
To the temptation of,
but that's adding quite a few words to the sentence.
And that's, I think in the context of what he is saying in those lines, because it's immediately after the line where he talks about male military conquest and rape being a payoff, he's saying, my fish speakers also submit to a form of rape. I don't know. I mean, literally, the more we talk about it, the more like confusing it gets. And the more problematic it gets. Like, it's just like, who knows what the fuck Frank meant by that line, or what Leto is trying to get across to Duncan by that line. But Leto goes on and he clarifies even further. He's like, okay, so yes, my huris, which that's the word he uses to reference the fish speakers, my huris will tame the males. They will domesticate the males, and here's how they do it. Quote, my huris teach maturation, Leto said. They know that they must supervise the maturation of males. Through this, they find their own maturation. Eventually, huris merge into wives and mothers, and we wean the violent drives away from their adolescent fixations. End quote.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is the process by which the fish speakers tame and domesticate the...
Kind of tame and are tamed, because it's also their transition out of adolescent military structures into the breeding population, into mothers and wives.
And wives, right. So let's pause here. I know we've already been like confusing ourselves by talking in circles about it, but let's confuse ourselves a bit further, because there are a lot of problematic ideas in these statements that Leto just made. And I want to begin by addressing the very first thing he says, where he says rape is foreign to women.
Sure.
That, I think, in and of itself is just like false, because rape is not just the domain of men. While the numbers definitely skew heavy toward women being the victims, men are also victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment. I found a study from 2018 by the National Sexual Violence Resource Center that states, quote, 81% of women and 43% of men reported experiencing some sort of sexual harassment and or assault in their lifetime, end quote.
Right.
So that statement from Leto is just not true, that rape is a foreign concept to women and that women can only experience it but not utilize it like men, and particularly men in the military do.
Yeah.
Or in the military mindset.
I don't know. I definitely see where Leto's coming from in that, because again, he's not going to be accounting for statistical experiences. And you're totally right that when it comes to victimhood, like, yes, everyone experiences this of all genders. People experience sexual assault and sexual, but also, and I think what we pulled up the NISVS report from 2016, 2017, 95% of all rape has a male perpetrator. So it's like, I understand calling it something that's statistically significantly foreign to women, where it happens, it certainly happens. But when we're saying 95% of rapes are male perpetrators, it's like, oh, well, that seems like a pretty big disparity. But right. You're also right that like victimhood and the people who experience this all of the data we have to look at is skewed by what is reported, what isn't reported. And there's a milieu of reasons why people don't report things. And then when we do see any men ever come forward and say, hey, yeah, I was raped, like reactions to that vary wildly, and men are mocked and, you know, whatever, their masculinity is questioned. It's just crazy. Right. It's all so gross and it's so awful. And I'll also say that as much as I'm pushing back now, I do think that at the end of the day, whatever Frank intended here, he missed. He totally missed whatever the fuck he was talking about.
By a country mile.
By a country mile. Because again, it's like, I maybe get what he's talking about, and whether it's the radical feminist thing from earlier or whatever, it's like, I'm almost there. But even so, it's so distracting from the point. It's like so distracting from the narrative, and it's just getting into this shit that we didn't need to get into. Like, we didn't need to be talking about this as part of a sci-fi book. And I don't even know that it's going to be a productive conversation, you know? Like, I'm all for authors handling heavy topics and helping people kind of process trauma through, you know, fiction. But I don't see that happening here. So it just seems like a weird, unnecessary, problematic side tangent, you know?
Yeah. It's worded so vaguely, right?
Yeah.
That we have to jump through hoops to try and interpret what the fuck Leto may or may not mean by what he just said.
Right.
You know? And so I agree. Like, we can't know Frank's intent in writing and choosing these exact words in this exact order to put in his character's mouth. But whatever the intent was,
it's a miss, dog. That's a miss, dog.
A huge miss. Like, an editor needed to jump in here and be like, Frank, what the fuck are you saying in this paragraph, bro?
Yeah.
Because, Frank, this can be taken in so many wrong ways. You need to figure out what you're saying here and say it better. And clearly that never happened.
Right.
Moving on from that, there are some other layers of problematic here as well. The other thing I wanted to bring up was this idea that Leto gets into about how men can't or won't break out of violent adolescent behaviors until they are, quote unquote, tamed by women, which is such a deeply problematic idea because it's very in line with this, like, LOL, laugh it off, boys will be boys mentality, right? To just write off anything guys do because it's just boys will be boys. It's whatever. It just takes any sort of self-responsibility from men away from them.
Right.
And Leto here is putting all that responsibility on his fish speakers, on the women, saying, oh, well, you know, actually they are responsible for fixing these men. That is part of their job as my fish speakers. And then he doubles down and says, actually, they also find satisfaction and reward and their own maturation by doing this. Fixing men fixes them. Wow.
Sure.
And, you know, he triples down in a way that just like made my eyes roll into the back of my head, was implying that the way they mature, and many of the fish speakers end up this way when they quote unquote retire, is as wives and mothers. And they continue to fix men, right? Because those wives and mothers will have sons who they will continue to domesticate and tame and help you know, push them out of violent adolescent tendencies. So it all just kind of like, Leto just like keeps digging further and further and further into this idea that already starts at a very problematic, releasing men from all responsibility and dumping all of that responsibility on women to fix.
And then also only giving women the two boxes to check. Are you going to be a wife or a mother?
Right. This is how you will fix it. Right?
When you're done killing people, you're going to be a wife or a mother. And a woman's like, neither. I don't.
A lawyer? Is that an option?
Can I be...
Is there an other box that I can write in my own?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Like, Leto's just like, oh, and then women themselves mature and become one of three things here, you know? It's dialogue like this, which makes parts of this book very tough for me to swallow. And also serves as like a stark reminder to me that ultimately this is a book written by Frank Herbert, who was a man of his time. And he probably had difficulty envisioning women outside of these like traditional roles as wives, mothers, and even you think of someone like Hui Nori as sexual attractive objects whose purpose is to attract the god emperor. It's tough. Like, I have a tough time with these sections of the book because we talk so much about the female characters we love in this series. Chani, Lady Jessica, they're all such cool characters with such cool potential. And then Leto says shit like this and you're kind of like, well, Now that I
Yeah.
think about it, Lady Jessica was kind of defined as just the mother of Paul Muad'Dib, and Chani was kind of
Yeah.
defined
Yeah.
as the wife of Paul. Then you're kind of like rethinking all of the past books and the past female characters and realizing that like maybe Frank himself could only think inside the boxes of his time and his mindset.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way to put it, because at the end of the day, I really do struggle to see kind of where Frank is at in his beliefs. And I think as much as it doesn't super matter for a book, in these moments, it's like, it kind of does. It kind of falls into my awareness of like, I want to know to assess how fucked up Leto is. Like, I kind of want to know, considering Leto is writing a lot with the voice of Frank.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, actually, because I've also heard people say, like, Leto's just a character. We can't just assume Frank agrees with everything Leto says. That's absolutely true. But Frank is writing the character and having the character TED talk about politics and social things. And on some level, we do have to say, like, Leto can be used as a mouthpiece for Frank's own beliefs.
Yeah.
Like many of the other characters in the whole series have been. And so it's moments like this where we're not attributing every word Leto says to Frank believes this.
Right.
But Frank did choose to write it, and we have to wonder why Frank wrote it and what was Frank's thinking behind having a character say this.
And that's the thing. If Duncan says something fucked up and backwards, it's like, yeah, he's a Gola, raised on Caladan, and then he spent some time on Grumman. Like, he has a whole back. Leto is every human who's ever lived.
Right. All knowing.
Almost by definition, Leto is outside of the constraints of this character only has a limited perspective. He does not have a limited perspective.
Right.
So when he is illuminating realities of the universe, we don't have a viable counterpoint. You can write fucked up weird characters, but almost implicitly, I think, to keep your book from sounding like fucked up propaganda, you need viable alternative voices going, yo, that's fucked up. And it's through that balance that we sense, okay, this is not just trying to convince me that women should only be wives and mothers and that men are inherently all these things. Like, it's having that other voice. And there is no other voice in this book. Like, every other character is just a pawn on the board for Leto. So I get it. Yes, Leto does not have to be one for one Frank, but the way Frank built Leto puts himself in the bad spot of, we kind of don't have an alternative to understanding Frank's beliefs, unless he then went into interviews and said, hey, by the way, I don't really believe any of that shit. It's to serve the future books. And I haven't found a quote of him saying that. So that's a little hard.
Right. Yeah. And Leto himself is a flawed character, and we've called out like some of Leto's own prejudices that are explained by his character in the book, right?
Yeah.
But some of these ideas aren't explained by Leto's characterization in the book. They are explained simply as, fuck you, he's all-knowing, back off, you know? And then in that instance, we have to wonder, why is there no explanation for this? Why did Frank write this, you know?
Yeah. I really wish these chapters were a little shorter and the like face dancer assassin attacks were like a little bit more longer. I'm like, no one gets angry when fucking face dancers are getting slaughtered. That's cool. Fuck the Tleilaxu.
More cool scenes like that, please.
I think as we kind of wrap up this takeaway, I think a lot of Leto's claims here very easily can rub you the wrong way, and many of them don't even necessarily hold water all that well.
Yeah.
I think when he's claiming that loyalty in a female army latches onto a leader more than a male army, it's like, fucking based on what? I mean, first of all, we just...
Show me your sources.
Show me your sources. And part of it's like, okay, so you made a fighting force of women unlike anything in the past. So are you just talking about this one that you made over 3,500 years? Or are you saying all women armies? And then based on fucking what? Right. And then the other side of that is this ignores the countless men who have fought and died and given their lives in the name of leaders, in the name of prophets. And it seems, although I think there is a broad problem of men who are more loyal to the armed forces than they are the people they're supposed to protect. And that sort of like maybe fraternity culture of it's about the brotherhood more than it is about the reason the brotherhood exists. I think that's probably valid, but beyond that, you're kind of just ignoring a big swath of what I think are actually valid data points.
Right. It's almost too narrow of a mindset it's taking one problem, which is the fraternity of military mindset, right?
Right.
Which we talked about earlier in the book as well.
Right.
It's taking that and applying it to every army that has ever existed, which is just not true because
Yeah.
millions of years of human history prove that plenty of male armies have fought and died in the name of their leaders. So it's almost taking this too narrow of a point and painting a very broad stroke with it across all armies. I think there's something else he says, and this is the last thing we'll touch on here in this takeaway. Leto in this conversation also mentions that men are prone to creating class-based societies, whereas women work together in ways that transcend class and caste.
Sure.
And thus he gives the reins to his fish speakers,
Right.
are the words he says to Duncan. Based on what, Leto? Because, I don't know, like, I feel like any young girl who was bullied in high school by the popular clique, by the popular pretty girls, can fucking prove Leto wrong here. Like, cliques exist in high schools, cliques exist, like, castes and classes exist in society. And you could argue, like, oh, well, it's women in a men's world, so they just follow men's rules of creating class. But the alternative data doesn't exist. So is Leto we just have to believe what Leto says here? I don't know. I have a hard time believing Leto's words here. It sounds like bullshit.
I get you. I think that's totally fair. I do think there is quite a bit of information about like indigenous peoples and matriarchal societies that don't have as structured class systems. And there are, of course, male-led societies that also don't have that, male-led cultures that don't have that. And I think some of this is explained by anytime he's talking about men, if you substitute that with the church and Western culture, a lot of this makes a lot more sense. And a lot of this makes sense also coming from Frank, who was raised Catholic and was not particularly fond of being raised Catholic. So if you say in Western society, aka society that was shaped by Abrahamic religions, creates and thrives given power structures saying these are things and we enforce these and these, and really like generating instances of people infighting within their classes to destabilize so they don't usurp and overthrow the whole fucking broken system. I think in the example of girls in high schools, it's like modern society, especially here in America, is very much based on power structures that are biblical, which is frustrating for me as a Buddhist, as like an agnostic atheist Buddhist. But I think considering like one of the most dominant cultural forces in human history spent 2,000 years building up patriarchal societies where men did a lot of these things, erasing cultures of matriarchal or patriarchal societies that didn't have the same class structures, where people didn't build the same castes and caste systems. It's like, okay, yeah, I could see that being valid. But again, that only really works if I do Frank the favor of saying maybe he's not talking about men and he's talking about men, capital M, within Western culture as defined by Abrahamic religions.
The institutions of men. Or
the institutions of men, exactly. At which point I'm adding a fucking footnote to his book just to make shit make sense. And it didn't have to be this way, Frank.
Right.
Write it better.
It didn't have to be so broad and all-encompassing and make little to no sense. And yeah, I agree. I think that's a really wonderful point, Leo. Like, we live in a world created for and by men.
Yeah.
And we all work within institutions that were created for and by men, right? And even the women within those institutions, within that world, within those societies, operate by men's rules.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess Leto's saying like the class-based societies we're all with could be because of those institutions, and women just follow those institutional norms. Yeah, I don't know. We're like putting words in Leto's mouth to make it make more sense.
Yeah.
Which kind of defeats the purpose of him saying these things.
He could have just said it differently, and we wouldn't have to bend over backwards to try to make it not shitty. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway.
So to wrap up this very long, windy takeaway, we wanted to explore these ideas because it's important to touch on them, right? It would be ridiculous if we got to this chapter and just completely glossed over this and never talked about it.
Leto says some wild shit about Sihanouk.
Anyway,
chapter 25. Yo, that would be
So-
such a relief, though, for real.
So
To
much
just
less work for us.
ignore
God
it.
damn it. Yeah, so much less research for us.
And soul searching and like fucking. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So it's important to talk about these ideas, but ultimately, as I stated earlier, parts of this book are very tough for me to swallow because of what Leto says, particularly his views on gender and sexuality, things we've talked about before. And I'm torn because on one level, I'm like, stop overthinking it. He's a character in a book.
Sure.
And we're told that he is working with infinite data points. He has other memory. He has prescience. He has life experiences you simply can't comprehend, Abu.
Yeah.
Just take his word for it.
Yeah.
Like, stop trying to overthink it.
Gaslighting
Part of me wants
the
to
novel.
just do that. Right. Part of me just wants to do that.
Yeah.
But then the other part of me wants to step out of it a little bit and be like, wait a second. This is still just a fictional character in a fictional book written by an old guy in the 70s.
Yeah.
And some of these ideas rub me the fucking wrong way.
Yeah.
And I'm going to criticize and call them out when they do.
And
And
that's
when the
valid.
ideas are
Yeah.
problematic
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
potentially harmful or outdated. And I want to, like kind of go in and call them out. So I really am of two minds about this book. Part of me wants to enjoy the ride with Leto. The other part of me wants to call this bullshit. So here we are.
Here we are.
Two lost souls.
Two lost souls. Yeah, all we can do is just kind of wonder out loud. And more so than in any other recording, I legitimately am not sure about some of this
I
stuff.
truly, the takeaway here for me is just, who knows what Leto means by this? Like, I am not sure.
At least that's my point, is it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be so vague. It didn't have to be so possibly problematic. It didn't have to rub anybody the wrong way. It could have just been very good. And a lot of the book is just very good. So it's these moments that are more than that are frustrating legitimately.
For sure. For sure. Alrighty. Well, those are our takeaways from today's reading. If you're still with us, folks, bravo. Bravo.
Thank you.
Hats off to you.
Oh, thank you.
We need you to hang on a little bit longer.
We got
Because
morsels.
after the break,
Yeah.
we still got some morsels to finish. We got morsels in the oven. We're going to plate them. We're going to eat them. And we're going to digest them right after this.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break and hope you brought your appetite because we've got some morsels to dole out. I never use
Yum,
that
yum,
verb, to dole out things.
That's good. That's fun.
It's also a brand of bananas, isn't it?
Right. Dole Whip.
Dole whip. Our first morsel today is Tyazor Licalo.
Hello. What a badass name.
What a great name,
Tyazor.
Tyazor. It's going to be my son's first name. Tyazor. So Tyazor came up in today's reading, and we talked about Tyazor at fucking length in our third Spice Morsel dedicated episode.
Right.
Because effectively, Tyazor is kind of an analog to like Beethoven or Bach, right? Or Brahms, right? It's just this huge musician. But in this reading, Leto tells us, quote, only 3 times in all memory had there been an equal to Bach. But even Licalo was not better. As good, but not better, end quote.
Okay.
And so while we talked about his life in depth in that Spice Morsel episode, with everything in mind now, we just wanted to take a lightning speed look at his life, but also some of the musical pieces that made him as good, not better, but as good as Bach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as a micro refresher, Tyazor was born in 12,191 AG on Chusik, same planet as Gurney Halleck. And he was born to a family of musicians. By the age of 15, he could play a whole bunch of instruments and was working professionally as an organist. By his mid-20s, our guy Tyazor had held a few very prestigious positions. He had started fighting some of his singers. He's really an interesting character. And he had begun writing pieces like the choral setting of his song, The Trial of Saint Satil, which is, quote, now regarded as the greatest choral work in the Gallic language. End quote.
Wow.
And again, Gallic is just a new word for English. This is the greatest choral work in the English language ever. Huge. Now, he worked as the director of music at the Saint Satil School for Boys for over 60 years before he died of a stroke at the age of 86. Now, talking about his music and the musical pieces, it also occurred to me, because we talked about that in isolation, this is during Leto's rule. Like, I don't know that I ever put two and two together. But
wow, that's true.
This is
3,500 years.
Yeah. So Leto's there doing his shit. Like everything we're reading about now, this is all happening. And meanwhile, Tyazor is out there composing music. And Leto's like tuning in via prescience. That concert was sick. And his majordomo's like, what are you talking about? This is so weird. Yeah. So anyway, just to ground us on a timeline, Tyazor was a contemporary of Leto Atreides. Now, among Tyazor's notable musical pieces, these are the standouts and kind of what makes them fun. First, his Silversmith Variations for Organum took a simple workman's tune and set it to over 30 variations. So it took a simple tune, variations, different themes and modes and blah, blah, blah. And this is an in-universe parallel to Beethoven's Diabelli Variations, where it's a similar thing. I think it was a violinist said, hey, I wrote this waltz, write variations of it. And Beethoven's like, hold my fucking quill, bro. And wrote 30, like 34 or something like that, like a crazy number of variations. And they're great. Tyazor also wrote an opera of the Battle of Corin called O Corin Min, which is both a telling of the story, but it also mocked the like current popular operatic style in a way that is very fun and very, very Tyazor. Classic Tyazor.
Classic.
But it also kind of innovated how voice could be written. And within that opera, there was an aria in which the singer was instructed to quickly drink an entire glass of wine, throwing the empty glass over their shoulder before singing what translates to toast, which sounds fucking awesome. That sounds like my kind of choir concert.
Hell yeah.
And then finally, in The Seven Sailors, a serious motet slowly becomes comical as more and more of the people on stage leaving the soloist alone and like looking nervously around, which also sounds very fun. A serious, brooding motet becoming this kind of comical little moment on stage.
Yeah.
So Tyazor Lacalo, writing some dope-ass music at the time of Leto's piece and making a name for himself as good as Bach, not better, as good.
As good. Hats off to our boy Tyazor.
Hats off. Pour one out. Or drink it quickly and throw the glass over your shoulder.
Alrighty, morsel number 2 for today is Huri.
Huri!
Now, throughout today's reading, Leto constantly uses the word Huri in regard to the fish speakers. And we wanted to take a second to just define that word, to look into its background and its nuance a bit further, and explore how it's employed in Dune and outside of Dune. So, to start, let's define it. Sure. Like many things in Dune, Frank has borrowed this word from Islamic mythology. Now, Britannica defines Huri as a concept in Islam, and a Huri is a, quote, beautiful maiden who awaits the devout Muslim in paradise. There are numerous references to the Huri in the Quran, describing them as purified wives and spotless virgins, end quote.
Gotcha.
And they're often depicted as companions or celestial maidens who reside in paradise and are literally created by God as a reward for male believers.
Right.
Good Muslim males get Huris in paradise, is the gist.
One of my Google searches today was, are there Huri for women? Inconclusive, unfortunately.
Inconclusive, yeah. And personally, from my own experience, this is a concept that I was explained to as a child.
Oh.
Not in sexual terms, but basically just like you will be rewarded in heaven with many wives if you're a good Muslim, if you're a good little Muslim boy.
Gee, I'm like, I can hardly handle one woman. Please, that sounds torturous.
Right. So nothing was ever explained to me about whether women are rewarded. And I certainly have my own thoughts about this as someone who's not very religious anymore. Sure. And I will refrain from getting into that because also it's not my place. But
spotless virgins sounds like bad in bed to me. That sounds like I'm responsible for teaching No.
Is this a reward or a fucking torture?
Like, I have to... I'm the most experienced one, and that's unfortunate for both of us.
Yeah, truly. Honestly, in very Muslim fashion, it's a reward on a knife's edge, you know? It's like, you're going to get a little treat, but I'm going to stab you also. Now, although it's tempting to associate the word Huri directly with Leto and the fish speakers, he's the one that uses it the most.
Right.
The term actually has come up before, believe it or not. And I had actually forgotten about this. You did the research and found this. But all the way back in the first book in Dune, Fade Rotha Harkonnen himself uses the word Huri when thinking about Margot Fenring. Here's the quote. Quote, "By the Huris of the Imperial Harem, she's a lovely one."
Oh, wait, no.
End quote.
We need movie casting accurate. By the Huris of Imperial Harem, she's a lovely one. Said Elvis.
Said Elvis. Incredible. Incredible. Wow. I will never get over your Elvis voice. But it's not quite your Elvis voice. It's your Austin Butler Elvis as Fade Rotha voice, which is slightly different, you know?
And 10% Johnny Bravo.
So, yeah, Fade Rotha, all the way back in the first book, uses the term Huris in reference to imperial harems, harem, another word for harem, as I learned today. So the concept existed around the time of Baron, Paul, and Jessica, though we can only guess on how widespread it was back then and whether or not it became more commonly used by the time of Leto.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe it's just one of Leto's favorite words and everyone else is weirded out that he keeps using it.
Yeah.
Although, and the last thing we'll say about this morsel is that Leto himself cannot even be credited with first calling his fish speakers Huris, because that credit has to go to our guy Malky.
Malky!
From the chapter earlier in the book where we first meet Huinori, we get this reflection from Leto. Quote, "Malky had reveled in the company of Leto's fish speakers. Your Huris, he had called them, and Leto could seldom think of the fish speakers thereafter without recalling Malky's label." End quote.
Yeah.
So our boy Malky is the one responsible for giving that label to the fish speakers in the first place. And it's kind of stuck enough that Leto now uses it, which is fun because Malky, the Ixian ambassador and Huinori's uncle / also maybe biological father,
right,
labeled the fish speakers as Huris. And we know that Leto was quite fond of Malky, or at least got along with him, you know, that rogue. And perhaps this is Leto's way of honoring Malky, one of perhaps the only people in history he could call somewhat of a friend.
Yeah.
By using the word that he gave the fish speakers. Who knows? But it's a fun little fact to know where it came from and the Islamic origins of the word itself. So there you go. Spice morsel number 2. Huris.
Yeah. I kind of found myself going, oh, what does it mean that like Leto brought this term back from ancient history, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, oh shit, wait, no, Malky's the one that fucking coined it. So then Leto's just like, hey, that's a good word for them.
Right.
Nice reference, Malky. 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10.
Stealing
a deep cut Islamic reference, bro.
Love that deep cut. Well, yeah. Indeed.
Alrighty.
There it is. We did it.
We did it.
And hey, normally we would tell you what point in the book to read up to.
Uh-huh.
But today's a little different.
Hello. We're giving up.
We are giving up and quitting life.
We're done, baby.
Sheesh,
I'm getting lost in my dream state.
I'm going to dream state for fucking ever. I'm going to put on my Oculus Quest and never come out. Yeah, that Vision Pro is going to hit different. Go forever. No, the next episode is going to be a mailbag.
That's right.
God Emperor of Dune specific mailbag. So, if you have thoughts, questions, observations about the half of the book that we've gotten through, because we're about the halfway point, which is pretty huge. Congratulations, everybody. This marathon is fun because you've joined us for it.
Yes.
And if you want to email us your questions, do so quickly. Again, public feed. This happened months ago, so don't even fucking bother.
Wow.
Yeah, no, just kidding. Just kidding. Send us emails. We like to hear from you. But for our next episode, we're going to pull any emails that we get from patrons at our gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com email address. You can absolutely email us there. Or, hey, we have a mailbag questions channel in the Discord server. So
Right.
you can drop in a question there, and we'll take them and we'll put them in the script.
Right. And look, if you're listening to this months down the line after that episode is done and gone on the public feed, don't worry. We are always doing public mailbags as well. So send your email, send your questions, send your observations, send your joke, and it might show up in a future episode. So this is a call to everyone. Now's the time. Send us your questions.
I was thinking that would be funny if we just, anybody who's not a patron, we just like search their name on Patreon, and if we can't find them, roll a die. And on like 2 and below, we just delete the email and never look at it.
Right. 1 is a critical failure. We send you back spam.
We sign you up for
Cat facts.
Cat facts. Yeah, we sign you up for the Bed Bath and Beyond mailing list. Truly a transmittable disease of the internet age.
True. Alrighty. Well, before we let you go,
Yes.
a quick couple of reminders on some great ways to support the show and to keep in touch with us.
Indeed. And the first one is how to best support us. So glad you asked, dear listener. Consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/GomJabar. You get cool benefits like ad-free episodes. You get early access to this book club that you're hearing right now or maybe months from now. You get weekly blooper clips and excerpts. Today's episode will probably have a few because we are at over 2 hours, and it is not going to be that long when you're listening to it. And of course, you'll get an invite to our exclusive Discord server where you can chat with us live. You can send us memes and have a good old time. It's a great old time. Consider becoming a patron if you're in a financial state to do so. Patreon.com/GomJabar.
That is right. Now, another great way to support us is to check out our merch store at GomJabarShop.com. We've got Dune-themed merch. There's art. There's apparel. There's mugs for your spice coffee.
Whoa.
There's a cute little tote bag with a cute little mouse on it, and so much more. So go check it out. Get yourself something nice. Get someone you love something nice. Get your neighbor something nice. Say hi to your neighbor, goddammit. You've lived there for 5 years. You've never said a word, okay?
No, don't do that. Don't talk to your neighbors, psychopath. Leave me alone.
GomJabarShop.com, okay? Talk to your fucking neighbor.
GomJabarShop.com. Don't. I will stand in silence and I will greet your dog before I talk to you, okay?
Wow. Note to self, never live next to Leo.
Yeah, problem solved. I don't talk to people. Well, finally, you can be unlike me and you can volunteer human interaction and you can email us, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from you.
Right.
For real, even though I am introverted, love to hear from you. So send us an email. Say hi, questions, comments, concerns, feedback. We love to hear it. gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com.
That's right, folks. Okay. What journey should I retreat into now?
Certainly not being told about Huri. I feel like that's not a good memory.
Yeah.
What else? What's on your menu?
I'm either going to watch the Kardashians.
Yeah?
That's about it.
Oh no, buddy. We gotta get you some better inner lives. If Leto was like, I must retreat from my sadness, what do I have? The Kardashians season 4. I'm doomed. Moneo!
Monero!
Moneo!
Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. We're also on TikTok at Gomjabar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.